Well, we were in First Corinthians, and we're going to Second Corinthians, but we're going to take a detour into Acts on this lesson, and there's a reason for that because of Paul's journeys and how this all transpired. First Corinthians, Paul established a church in Corinth. Paul wrote First Corinthians. Then there was a span of time. Second Corinthians was predominantly about receiving the money and getting it back to Jerusalem for the famine in Judea. And in between First and Second Corinthians, there was another letter we call the harsh letter that was in between those that basically Paul wrote that he kind of almost apologizes for in Second Corinthians because it was very harsh. But Paul is at this point is in Ephesus, and Paul's going to go to Troas, and he's going to wait for Timothy. Timothy's not going to show up when Paul's in Troas, so Paul's going to go to Macedonia. And when Paul goes to Macedonia, then Timothy's going to meet him there. And we read about that in 2 Corinthians. So that's kind of why, where are we at? There we go. That's kind of where we're at. Now, to kind of make this make more sense, because it always helps me to look. Paul's in Ephesus, which is down here. And Paul's going to wind up going to Macedonia. So this is where he's going to wind up. Corinth is down here. So Paul's actually going to wind up going into Macedonia from Ephesus. And he kind of talks like he would have liked to went to Corinth, but it just didn't work out that way. So Paul's going to wind up going to Troas, where he's going to wait for Timothy. And of course, that's not going to happen. And so he'll go from Troas, he'll go over here to Macedonia. So he's Ephesus now. He's going to go up to Troas. Then he's going to go to Macedonia. And he's waiting to meet with Timothy. So, at that time, things weren't like they are today. You depended on people to get there to tell you. You set things up in advance. If people weren't there, you didn't know. You didn't know what happened to them. That would be very worrisome, right? You wouldn't know if something had happened to them, if they were dead. You wouldn't know. There's no way to know. So it would be very worrisome to do that. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, but it's terrible being lost from people, right? Have you ever been lost? We don't get that way much anymore. But when I was a kid, we was always lost from somebody, right? Now we got cell phones, but went to old Mexico when I was a kid. Me and my stepfather, my mom, my sister, in this big camper. We're going down to get my stepsister. She was in Chihuahua, Mexico, down south of Mexico City. And we took my brother, my stepbrother, and his friend Guy. They were in this Ford Econoline panel van, and some other person was there. They were all long-haired hippie freaks, and they was all wearing their cut-off jeans in this Econoline van. And it seems like we were always lost somehow from them. And it was really a nightmare being in old Mexico where you couldn't speak the language and not knowing where people were, and you'd be waiting and you didn't know whether to go or wait or stay. So I kind of understand how Paul felt, right? You don't know what to do with yourself. But that was kind of a lot of what went on here, and it would be very worrisome to him. In Ephesus, we're going to talk about Diana, Artemis. She is the goddess of fertility. There is another Artemis that's a goddess of the hunt. The one in Ephesus is not that goddess. Artemis, Diana, was a goddess of fertility. Contrary to what the statue looks like, I've read a lot about this. They say those are not breasts around her bottom. They're actually bull testicles or gourds. So I don't know if that's a lot better, but that's what it's supposed to be. It was a wooden statue that's about fertility, right? Fertility, right? It was a wooden statue. In Acts, it says it fell from heaven, and that kind of gives the idea that it's a meteor. But all I can read about it, it's not really the truth. It was some sort of a wooden statue. It might have been on a base. It was destroyed in the fire. It was rebuilt. The temple of Diana, or Artemis, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. That's a recreation of it that exists today. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. So it's a big thing. Ephesus is a thriving city, a lot of money, center of trade. Artemis is that's a big part of their economy. What about that? What about religion and economy, right? How many times has a religion survived because of economic reasons, right? Not because of necessarily religious reasons, but sometimes, a lot of that comes down to economics, doesn't it? The Jews, we often criticize the Jews for not accepting Jesus and rushing out to be baptized and renouncing Judaism. But the truth is, that was a real economic burden to them. If you lived in Jerusalem, that was a Jewish city. If you denounced Judaism, you weren't allowed in the temple. A lot of places wouldn't do business with you. You could lose your source of income. A lot of people say a lot about religion and about faith, but the truth is, a lot of people really get swayed when it really gets down to influencing their pocketbook. I mean, I'm not saying that it shouldn't, but I'm just telling you that's how people. A lot of times that works, right? This was a big money thing. Artemis, they built these statues. They sold them. Paul and his people are coming in. They're saying, this is a false god. You need to serve Christ. All this is false religion, pagan religion. Paul was known for that, so that was a big part of dispute, and that's what you run into as we get into Acts 19 here, is this thing about money was influencing them. They weren't really worried about the truth. They weren't really worried. Jim said, we can speak the truth, and we should teach the truth. But there's a lot of times that people don't want to hear it. For a lot of different reasons, people don't want to hear it. And a lot of times it's because it might hinder them financially, it might hinder them socially, it might hinder them work-wise, and they're not willing to put God ahead of that. So, that's a big thing. And, it's hard sometimes to take that out of the equation. And in this case, with Artemis, it wasn't about the truth. It wasn't about Christ. It wasn't about whether Paul was right or Paul was wrong or whatever. It had nothing to do with that. It was about, this is our income, this is our business, and this man's going to take it away from us. That sets the stage for what's going on here. Paul gets caught in the middle of this, right? Obviously, he's the one they're going to look at. He's the one that's going to get in trouble for it. So this sets up a stage that is going to be it's going to be a problem. Acts 19, we're getting down to the point. Paul's looking towards Rome. After he finished, Paul purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem after he passed through Macedonia and Achaia, saying, after I've been there, I must also see Rome. So he's sending them ahead, Timothy and Erastus. He's sending them ahead, and he's staying in Asia Minor, what we call Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. That's where Ephesus is. And he's sending them ahead. And he says, I'm going to go to Rome. Now, how's that going to work out for Paul? How's he going to go to Rome? Going to go in chains, right? Going to go as a prisoner. So Paul's purposed in his heart to go to Rome. Paul will go a lot of places. Let's go back a little bit. When you look at where all Paul goes, through Asia Minor, this whole region, Galatia, we call it here. And the book of Galatians is written to this area, to this region right here. So Paul always leaves from Antioch. There's two Antiochs, Syrian Antioch, Pisidian Antioch. But Paul is going to he's going to evangelize all this, essentially. That's quite a bit of work, right? I mean, you consider it. He's going to do this on foot and on a boat. And he's going to evangelize all this. And he's even going to wind up in Spain eventually. So, he's going to go to Cyprus. He's going to go to Crete. Titus is on the Isle of Crete, the book of Titus. Titus is on the Isle of Crete. He's going to go to Crete. He's going to go through all these regions of Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. All this in here. He's going to go over into Rome. He's going to go to Corinth. He is going to go to Greece. He's going to speak on Mars Hill. I mean, he is well traveled, right? I mean, he's well traveled, and he's going, he's starting these churches, he's putting in elders, he's planting churches, he's writing letters, he's going back to see how they're doing, he's worried about them, he's doing all this stuff. Paul's a busy guy. Now, I don't know if all the other apostles were as busy as Paul or not. I often wonder that, you know. We don't know a lot of what they did. We don't know most of what they did, to be honest about it. Just historically, we know where some of them wound up. But Paul he was everywhere, right? He's like that Johnny Cash song, I've been everywhere, man, right? I mean, he was everywhere, right? And Paul he was prolific in what he did. And so he is also sending these other guys ahead, Timothy and Erastus. They're going to wind up in Corinth. About that time, there occurred no small disturbance concerning the way. And at this point, that's what it's called, the way. And I think that's really important. And I think we kind of miss that sometimes. You know, the way, that's kind of an interesting terminology, isn't it? The way of what? The way of Christ? It's interesting they got that title, the way. You know, Christians, the word Christians only used 2 times in the New Testament. And I don't know that Christians was necessarily not a derogatory remark in the first century. Oh, I can just kind of say, oh, them Christians, right? You know, it's them Christians again, you know. Christians are everywhere, right? You know, and I don't even know that it was that positive of a statement. But the way or disciples is used a lot more in the Bible of those designations. And Paul or Luke uses it here in talking about what's going on. Demetrius is a silversmith, and he made silver shrines of Artemis and was bringing no little business to the craftsmen. So they wanted these talisman, right? Isn't that what this is? These little silver shrines are like a talisman, you know. And they sold these little things. People go to the temple, they go to sacrifice to Artemis or Diana, however you want to term that, and they would buy these things and they would take them home, these little trinkets or these silver trinkets. And it was a lucrative business. And so when Paul came in to start disturbing that, he was disturbed about it. Demetrius was disturbed about this whole situation, and he decided that something needed to be done. And so he got to these trade guilds. And, you know, we talk about unions today, but if you really look at these Greek towns, especially in the Old Testament, they had trade guilds, and you had to be part of these guilds. So that was kind of their union, you know, these guilds. And so he went to these guilds and he said, our prosperity depends upon this business. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a considerable number of people, saying that gods made with hands are no gods at all. You know, Paul's reputation is spreading, isn't it? Paul's reputation is spreading. And and they know that, and it's causing a lot of harm to their business. Gods made with hands are no gods at all. So, what do you think about that statement? So do we do the same thing in a way today? I mean, you know, how do you get, you know, people for years in the church, back me up on this, Jay, Brent. For years in the church, Buck, for years in the church, right? We were against literally anything that resembled any kind of an image, right? I mean, that was absolutely something that didn't happen. I mean, even a Christmas tree, am I right? You know, even a Christmas tree, you can't have that, right? Yeah, he didn't do that. So, you know, where do we draw the line on that? You know, I have a lot of crosses in my house. I got a whole wall of crosses in my house, and I got a lot of religious, like, tapestries in my house. And like Brent says, there was a time you just, you know, in the church you didn't do that. I always thought that was kind of wrong in a way too, you know. So where do you, you know, what do you think about that? You know, what do you think about those kind of things? Yeah, if it persuades you away, if we put any kind of, you know, religious significance on them items beyond just decorative, I could see there could be an issue with that. Shrines or the idea of, you know, some sort of an idea of hanging of Saint Francis from your car window because he's the patron saint of travelers, right? Saint Francis, if you're Catholic. Christopher. Okay. Yeah, it's a world of difference, and I love going to cathedrals. And you can ask Susie. I drag her into cathedrals all over the country when we travel because I love I love going into cathedrals. And the imagery is just amazing to me. And the amount of effort that goes into that imagery is, yeah. Yeah, yeah. There was and that drove that a lot. I mean, that idea of not wanting, I used to hear that, that looks Catholic. We don't want to be Catholic, and I used to hear that. So that used to drive that separation of Protestants and Catholicism. That was a big driving. I don't think it is now, but years ago that was a big driving factor. So there's a lot of things. A God made with hands is a whole different deal. I mean, that's a whole different level to say, I've got this here and that's a God. I read a real interesting thing about the golden calf and Moses, and I should have saved that. Perspective I'd never thought of in my life, to be honest, about the calf, the golden calf, and that the people weren't deserting God. They just wanted a physical image to fall down and worship, and and that's the reason they built the calf. Real interesting article. I mean, real interesting. I wish I'd have saved it. Very interesting perspective. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I don't. And if I was to go into your house, that would be decorative to me. I wouldn't even think that would be nothing to me. But I could. To some people, they might say, "Oh, well, what's that?" Or why do you have that? Well, you need to rub Buddha's tummy, right? Always rub the tummy when I leave. But but right. Shannon brought up a good point when she was in Europe, and again, a lot of the old cathedrals over there, and of course, there's some really magnificent stained glass, and about all of it is the story. And Shannon said, many years ago, most people were illiterate; they couldn't read, and those stained glass windows, they could tell a story, with those pictures basically on that glass, they could tell a story, and it did. And a lot of, if you go into a lot of cathedrals, there'll be different stained glass images that do depict different Bible scenes, different things, the way to the cross. Generally there's stuff around there showing the road to the cross or the way to the cross. Via Dolorosa, 14 stations of the cross. So, I think that we see that. I think we've tried to, and I think maybe we're in a better place now than we were, 20, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. Um, so, but that idea of graven images, at what point does something become an idol? At what point does something become a talisman or something that brings us, quote, good luck, right? Or protects us, right? Put this on there, this cross to protect you. That starts to get a little bit different meaning into what we have, right? Into how we look at that. So, I think you have to consider, what that is. To me, it's decorative, and I have that in my house, and I love that in my house. And when people walk into my house, I want them to know they're walking into a Christian home. I don't want to have pagan art necessarily, or I want them to know when they walk into my house, they're walking into a Christian. And I think Jews and God was big on that. In Deuteronomy, he says, put the mezuzah that you put on the doorpost, put your word on the gateposts and on the doors of your house. And they took that very literally, and you walk into a Jewish home, you would see the mezuzah, you'd see the words of the law, nailed to the door, or on their frontals or on their forearms. And you would know, there's recognition in that. Like Brent says, you see a cross on somebody's neck, you kind of come to the conclusion, yeah, they're a Christian or they're a believer. Maybe they're not. Maybe they just think that's a cool cross. We don't, but that's kind of what we bring to the table. So, I think it's kind of a interesting thing. I not getting off track, maybe getting off track a little bit, but I kind of have a problem with selling Jesus, selling Christianity. And sometimes I kind of see that and stuff, different stores, Christian stores, and the way they market it towards Christians, and but on the other hand, we spend money on other things and don't think anything about it too. So I don't know, just one of those things, I guess. You kind of got to figure it out in your head. But at this point, this was their trade. Yeah, absolutely. What you do with what you got, and how you take it and how you perceive it. This here, he's getting in this, and Paul's spreading, turning away, getting into their business. Obviously, it's to the point that it's hurting their business, right? I mean, this has grown to the point that it's actually hurting their business, hurting their bottom line. Not only is there danger this trade of ours fall into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Artemis be regarded as worthless, and that she whom all of Asia and the world worship will even be dethroned from her magnificence. So, whether or not he was a great believer in her or not, I don't know. But that was his angle, right? That was definitely his angle. And that's the way he was, they were filled with rage. Greatest Artemis of the Ephesians, and the city was filled with confusion. And they rushed to the theater. The theater in Ephesus, I should have given you a picture of that. I've never been there personally, but I got pictures. The theater in Ephesus was huge. It seated like 50,000 people. It was huge, this huge arena. So, I mean, when they brought them into this theater, which is like this huge amphitheater is what it is, where they would do these live shows and do these productions. And so this is a huge venue. And so they're dragging them in there, and this is spreading, and a lot of people don't even know why they're there, but they're caught up in the riot. They're caught up in the crowd. Paul is in the middle of all this stuff. Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia. So Paul's not in there at this point, but they got his companions. Paul wants to go. They're not going to let him. They're scared for his life. They're scared that he'll be harmed or that they might kill him. So this thing's got out of hand. It's a big riot now at this point. And some of the who were friends of his sent to him, repeatedly urged him not to venture into the theater. So Paul is wanting to go in, but they're telling him, don't go in. Obviously, you can't go in. You need to stay out of there. Great harm's going to come to you if you go. And so this thing's definitely gotten way out of hand. Some were shouting one thing. The assembly, I like that word in 32. Same word translated church, right? Same exact word in the Bible. I think that's something. What a poorly translated word in the Bible is the word church. Shouldn't even be in the Bible. Shouldn't be a church. I mean, shouldn't say that, should I? Shouldn't be a church. It does, but at the time, well, because at the time it was translated, of course, you know me, I really like that stuff. I really like Bible translations and Bible history and church history, and there was a great argument about that word in 1611. Uh, I know, but it was, but King James, he insisted on that word. The translators, when King James was translated, there was two different groups of scholars that was used to translate King James. There was a group of Greek scholars and there was a group of Hebrew scholars. And the Hebrew scholars did the Old Testament. The Greek scholars used Erasmus New Testament and and there was a huge debate. Um, I'm sure it's there, but if you ever get a chance, I'm not going to say that because I don't know, but when the passages deal was going around, which was Green's deal, Mardell, and Hobby Lobby, Green owns that. The Greens. He's the one that's basically funded the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C. That's basically his funding. He has a tremendous amount of Bible stuff that he's bought. Anyway, they had a passages exhibit that I'm sure basically is probably bigger and better than that in Washington, D.C., but in the middle of that exhibit, you were walking into this room. Basically, it was like this room where they were doing this translation. And in this audio speaker above you was the argument going on between King James and the translators. And the translators were saying, the word's ecclesia, word's assembly. And anyway, the translators were insisting, wanting it to be assembly. And King James was adamant, you're going to translate this church. This is going to be church. New word, basically. And the reason that he was adamant about that is that he wanted the authority to be in the church, Church of England. That time, that was King James, right? Because by the time you get to King James, Roman Catholicism and Church of England split off because of King Henry VIII, right? Because Henry VIII wanted his marriage annulled, and the Pope wouldn't do it. So Henry VIII took all the land from the Roman Catholics in England and started the Church of England. And so that's Church of England now, and that's where King James was. And King James was adamant. He wanted it church because he wanted the authority to be in the church, not the assembly. Because if you say the assembly of the saved, right? If you say I'm going to the assembly of the saved, that's a more open idea. All those who are saved. The church is more specific, like a body, an organization, a political organization, like a political deal. The church. So King James is very adamant about that. But it's the same exact word used here for assembly, same exact Greek word. And I know we're in 2021, but it's interesting how we take words and then if it's a word that's not like properly translated, it's the same issue we have with the word baptism. If we take a word like that and we create a word, then we can give that word whatever definition we want, right? We can define that word. So, like the word baptism in the Bible, baptizo in the Greek, right? That word baptism should be immersion. That's exactly what that word means, exactly how it should be translated. But they couldn't translate it immersion, right, in the King James. Why couldn't they translate it immersion in the King James? They didn't immerse, right? And so what did they have to do? They had to make a word. So they transliterated the word baptizo into the word baptism, and then they could make it mean whatever they wanted it to mean. If they would have translated the word as immersion, then all those people who were getting sprinkled on and poured on would go, well, that didn't happen to me. So why didn't that happen to me, right? So all of a sudden, so what do? They create a word, they give the word its own definition, and then they make it mean what they want to mean. When we start to say church, it's divisive, isn't it? The church, organizational, the church, right? Assembly. But, so anyway, that's how come I say that. So that's why I say that, Brent. Just one of those things, I mean, my mind goes, I just love that stuff, I love that. I love going back into that translations and those times and putting my head around what those guys were trying to think when they were. Because all translations are biased. There's no such thing as an unbiased translation. It doesn't exist. Because every translator's he's got a belief. He's got an agenda, And that's how come translations can be so misleading. Because every translation that was ever translated is biased to an extent. It has to be. You know, it's just like if I was translating the Bible, I would want my beliefs to come forth in that translation. And I would make sure that happened. Does that make sense? You know, I would promote my theology. And so every time you have a translation, that's what happens. People promote, there's always an agenda. And that's how come you really got to think and study and think, well, what's that mean? And what exactly are they trying to say? And what are they trying to push? But those words, church and baptism, are two great examples of how translators pushed an agenda on Christianity, and how Christians at that point in time really didn't understand exactly what was going on in that agenda, you know. So you really, it makes you think, or it does me, about how that works. And that's the word that does that, assembly. Uh, Today they were added to what? Added to the assembly of the saved. The crowd concluded it was Alexander, since the Jews had put him forward. Alexander was intending to make a defense, but when they recognized that he was a Jew, poor Alexander, he got caught up in the middle of this, right? And he's going to wind up showing up as a Christian, right, eventually. But at this point, he's a Jew, and these people that are against Artemis, they don't care if they're Jew, Christian, all that's against their belief, against what they believe. And so he's there. He's going to be the scapegoat. They rose and they shouted for 2 hours, "Greatest Artemis of the Ephesians." So this riot's going on. 2 hours they shouted it. Very passionate about this, obviously. And the crowd said, "Men of Ephesus, what is there after all who does not know? The city of the Ephesians is guarding the temple of the great Artemis, and of the image which fell down from heaven." That's the part we kind of have a hard part with. Nobody really kind of understands that. Like, this image fell down, and it was this image, but it was a wooden image. And that, originally when I read that, I thought it was like a meteor that fell down, and they kind of made that, but it doesn't back that up historically. So, although I've heard that argument. And since these are undeniable facts, you ought to keep calm and do nothing rash. You brought these men here, neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of our goddess. So then if Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint, the courts are in session, proconsuls are available, let them bring charges. So this clerk's trying to calm things down. Poor Alexander, he's caught in the middle. If you want anything beyond this, it should be settled in the lawful assembly, for we are in danger of being accused of a riot. Why are they worried about that? Who's going to accuse them of a riot? Who's really over all this area of the world still? Rome. Yeah, I mean, you know, so the Romans, if it's a riot, the Romans are going to get involved. They don't care about Artemis. They don't care about Christ. They don't care about Jews. So they're going to get involved. It's just their matter. It's just a civil disturbance, right? And he says, we're going to get accused of a riot. This is going to come down. He says, after the uproar ceased, Paul sent and exhorted him, taking leave. He left to go to Macedonia. So Paul's going to go to Macedonia from there, and he's going to, and then instead of going to Corinth, he's going to go to Macedonia. But that's how come you got Acts in the middle of all this. Kind of a short lesson tonight. Are there any great comments? You know, Paul could have went. You know, Paul kept writing letters to the church in Corinth, and you wonder, when you look at it on the map, you're kind of thinking, why didn't Paul just go down there? You know, why didn't Paul just go? But, you know, them distances on foot were a long ways, and that was a lot of traveling, right? Dangerous traveling. So even though to us that's relatively a short distance, to them that was quite a ways to go. And Paul, you know, I think when you really look at Paul's life, that was probably his greatest problem, is that he had so much spread out over so much area that he just couldn't. I think it drove him crazy, you know. I think he wanted so much to be everywhere, and he couldn't be. And what he heard was what people would tell him, and then he would get upset. Then he would write letters, and he had sending people out, sending people back to him. But I can really see the anguish in the life of Paul, and most of his anguish was this right here. All these people that he couldn't be with everybody, and it put him in a hard place, I believe. They're big towns. I mean, Ephesus had a 50,000 seat amphitheater, so the idea of being a church of several thousand probably would not be. I mean, if it was big enough, it was getting into their trade. It had to be pretty good size. I mean, and I'm not saying it was all in one place, but I mean, there was a lot of believers, a lot of Christians. I mean, they say, when the persecution started, some people put that up as high as 5, 6 million Christians were killed. I mean, that gives you an idea of how this spread in a short period of time. I mean, it was, Christianity was it was it was going crazy. I mean, people were converting to Christianity. That's how come this was a problem. I think that's why Luke puts this in here. Not so much because Luke wants us to know about a riot at Ephesus and Alexander getting drilled before the deal. I don't think that really matters. I mean, you have to say, why did Luke include this? Well, one thing, he was trying to bridge us on Paul's journeys, why Paul was there, where Paul was going. But I think the other thing, because Luke's an historian, right? This whole book, Acts, I wrote it to Theophilus so you can have an account of those things you believe. I mean, that's why he wrote it. He was giving credibility to Christianity. He was telling Theophilus that what you believe is true. And I think one reason that he included this in this was because he wanted to show how great of influence Christianity had become. I mean, obviously they were more influential here than the Jews were. So, Christianity was growing and gaining so much influence. And I think that's why Luke wanted us to see it, was that, man, this is going crazy, and it's getting to the point that it's no longer the way. It's no longer a little disturbance. It's no longer a little bit of an issue. It's a big deal. This is a big deal now. And I think that's why Luke wanted us to see it. Yeah, the Jews trying to tell the demons out of the seven sons of Scevia. Yeah. 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 So it's a good, it gets us, and that's the reason we have this. We're going to start on 2 Corinthians Sunday morning because this is kind of the bridge to that. That's why I just got thrown in the middle, because this is Paul in the middle of 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. This is Paul in the middle of that. Acts 19. Acts runs from the beginning of the church, conversion of Paul, Acts chapter 9, but Acts end with Paul being in Roman imprisonment. First Roman imprisonment is the end of Acts. Paul's in first Roman imprisonment. That's the end of Acts. So 1 Corinthians is written before this. 2 Corinthians will be written after this. There's a letter in the middle, but this is where Paul is now, going to Macedonia. So that's why they threw this in the middle of this study, because it kind of gives us an idea where he is, where he's going, what he's doing. So, all right. Well, thanks for your time this evening.